All right, so I should amend a previous statement. It didn't actually start with um anything to do with far left ideology at all.
Okay.
So the game that Zoe Quinn developed was called Depression Quest,
Okay.
and it received rave reviews in gaming media. As far as I know, the actual consumer reaction to it was less than enthusiastic.
Got quite a bit of awards from people too.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. The media fawned over this game. And so the whole Gamergate thing started with this accusation that Zoe Quinn was essentially trading sexual favors for positive coverage from this Nathan Grayson dude in Kotaku.
Whoa.
Because as we know, games journalists are a very tight-knit ideologically aligned group, right?
And driven.
So it's very easy to see how, some positive articles and pushing from Nathan Grayson could have led to the game's wider acclaim in the game from games journalists as a whole. So this whole thing started as basically a reaction against this idea that Zoe Quinn was essentially using the structure of the games journalism industry to try and get attention for her game. And it was all about ethics in games journalism. It didn't actually have much to do with far left politics to begin with.
It was more about the relationships between people who make games that are aligned with the values of the journalists, basically.
Yeah, it was more so about
them propping it up.
Yeah, it was more so about the games journalists propping up games that they felt aligned with their particular interests or values, instead of providing fair and balanced and honest coverage of the games industry as a whole.
As well as people, you also had people like Zoe Quinn, but you also had those like Anita Sarkeesian as well take advantage of that.
Yeah, and that's where the identity politics thing started to come into play. You had Anita Sarkeesian, who was essentially an outsider. Yeah. She was not part of
part of the industry.
Part of the industry, and she was not what you would call a gamer by any stretch of the imagination. But she started to essentially comment upon the games industry, trying to basically critique games from the perspective of far left politics. And the backlash happened when games journalists propped her up and amplified her voice. And people started to see this and were, upset that they had to deal with games journalists who, instead of just providing fair and balanced coverage of the games industry, were actively involved in pushing an outsider's political opinions upon them.
Yeah, and I think it's weird because before this, it wasn't really that was never really an issue. Like, you had games like BioShock, which were very political, and like showed an ideology through a different lens. And you had games that were political. Like, there's nothing wrong with games being political in that sense, or like infusing stuff. I don't think it's inherently wrong, but it's if it benefits the game, that's great. BioShock's a great example of that. You also have stuff like Spec Ops: The Line, which is kind of like a commentary on Afghanistan in a way, and the modern like war effort with the United States and the effects that it has on countries that we're invading. And like, so it's not really, I wouldn't think it's necessarily wrong to have politics in quotes in games, but to have it made in I'm trying to figure out what I want to describe here, but having it like, I think it's all based on what people are creating it. And those like Anita and Zoe wanted to really like have a great effect on it and kind of just for their own gain in the sense, not to drive. Yeah, they were all ideologically aligned, and that's the avenue they used to get famous. That's the avenue they used to get money, to stay relevant, even though they are irrelevant today. Anita kind of stays a little bit, but it's definitely not. Zoe Quinn also had a, if you want to go look this up, Sophia Narowitz on YouTube and Twitter kind of tracked this down, where she like tracked down who Zoe Quinn was and like basically did a ton of research and investigation into her and what she was doing after all of this Depression Quest stuff. She had a game in development that was an FMV game, had a lot of different gaming journalists and YouTubers in it, and it looked like a trash bin, honestly, and it had a Kickstarter. And I'm going to quickly look up, I don't know what the Kickstarter was, but like the money, but it was in the tens of thousands of dollars that she got for this game to create it. And she had a pitch video. She had even the Jimquisition at the time, as he was referred to in there. Somebody, I think it was either Bradley Ellis or somebody else from Easy Allies was also in there as well. Like just people she knew, people who were friends of her. And it's like, and I could be wrong, it's probably not Bradley Ellis. This might be one of the others of Easy Allies. But also it's like, you had this game she created and kickstarted, and then Sophia Narwitz dug into it, and because the game never came out, and she's like, where did the money go? Zoe then proceeded on, if you go through her Twitter, she proceeded to post pictures of her taking a vacation to Japan. She also released updates about the game, and it was just, I need to do more research on this, like of the last updates and the money it created. But basically, she basically theorized that, yeah, all this money's kind of gone. She kind of just took it and ran. This game was supposed to be made like 7 years ago. It's never happening at this point.
Yeah.
And it's just like she took the money and ran it. It's really sad that those kind of people like Zoe were kind of prompted up by the games industry, who just, she had really like, it was just like a wolf in a hen's house, really.
But that's the interesting thing too, is this whole Gamergate movement, it lasted for about a year.
Yeah.
But it was never a unified movement.
No.
And it never had any clear goals.
Now, I have a question for you, though. Sorry to interrupt you. When you mean Gamergate, are you talking about the situation in itself, or like Gamergate being the people that were against the movement of ideology in the people making games?
Gamergate was the backlash against against games journalists and against identity politics being pushed in games.
Okay, because like when I heard of the term, I'm like, I don't even know what this is or what it means. But so thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. So Gamergate didn't last for very long. It had no clearly defined goals, no unified structure, and so eventually it just petered out. And essentially, the games journalism industry just kind of continued on the way it was, and no meaningful change happened. So, and which is really interesting, because now when you look up, because now all you have in terms of concrete information on Gamergate is journalistic coverage of Gamergate. So you've gone from what it actually was to what is
written about the history of it by those who write the history.
Yeah. So now you have this essentially rewritten history about the whole movement, and it's just so fascinating to me, because like here's the Wikipedia article on Gamergate. Gamergate was a loosely organized misogynistic online harassment campaign and a right-wing backlash against feminism, diversity, and progressivism in video game culture. Like complete and total misrepresentation of what Gamergate was, and what it was about. And yet, because Gamergate never produced any concrete results, as far as the movement was concerned, all we have that's left of it is this negative press coverage. And so it's kind of interesting how entrenched the games journalism is, to the point where the consumer, the actual people buying the games that these journalists are writing about, could do nothing to change it. And so it this is all sort of coming to a head again in terms of this whole Sweet Baby Inc. controversy, which I find so fascinating. So it all starts with a simple Steam curator group marking what games Sweet Baby Inc. is involved with. So if people want to avoid them because of the ideology that they push, then they can. It's merely to provide information. And so, but what ends up happening is Sweet Baby Inc. catches wind of this Steam curator group, and using the power of the entrenched games journalism industry, creates a massive crap storm, turning this simple curated list of here's games that they worked on, if you're interested in knowing, to, oh, it's a targeted harassment campaign against me, kind of a thing. You know, it's just fascinating to me how these exact same sort of issues have come to a head, 10 years later. Because this is this is essentially the 10-year anniversary of Gamergate.
Yeah.
And so it's just so fascinating to me how the exact same issues are coming to a head exactly 10 years later. And this time, though, there is a little bit of a bright spot on the horizon. As terrible as it is that, the economy is going down the toilet, it's kind of funny that it's having the unintended side effect of basically taking down games journalists as well. Not that I want to celebrate anyone losing their job, but it's like these people have done a lot of damage for a lot of years. And so I think it's kind of interesting that simple economics are going to be these people's downfall, because Kotaku has recently gone through a massive shift to they've fired hundreds of people, and their whole company is restructuring. So they're not going to focus on games journalism anymore. They're going to focus on putting out video game guides, which these days can be mostly done with AI.
Yeah.
And all you need is the AI.
To be fair, a lot of things can be written by AI.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Nowadays, all you really need to write a game guide is an AI, and then someone to go over and check it and make sure there's no mistakes or anything like that in it.
When they were announcing that, and did they mention AI?
No, they didn't mention AI, but a lot of people are speculating that essentially was, if Kotaku goes through with this whole restructuring and change in business model, that the game guides are going to be written by AI.
Okay. So it's like presumed that it'll be.
Yeah, the presumed business model is that the guides are going to be written by AI, and what little staff that they do retain will be there simply to go through these AI written guides and make sure they're presentable for release.
I think this whole thing with Sweet Baby Inc. is fascinating because, like you said, it's the 10th anniversary of Gamergate. I remember during that time, it was like you're hearing about it. I'm like, man, what's going on? It was like a whole cultural awakening during that time. And it's funny how that in the games industry, it kind of was the starter of a lot of cultural revelations from people. I mean, you had Anita Sarkeesian, which drew eyes to people like Sargon of Akkad, who people flocked to him, and then he grew a fan base, and now he has a business. And I'm more fans of him because he's more of the sense of freedom and just freedom of thought as well, and versus people like those we've mentioned, where they're like, you know, they want to have people with fixed mindsets to only view life through the lens that they do, whether it be through race or gender or whatever. And I think that's if you want, you know, I feel like people can live the way they want, but if you look at life through those kind of lenses, you're kind of just selling yourself short, because there's so much more to life than that.